Hello and welcome to the first episode of Comp and Coffee in 2024. This is episode 88. I hope you all had a great festive period and got to spend some time with your families and loved ones, a bit of rest and relaxation. I know this time of year is particularly difficult for those of us working in HR and compensation with many year-end review processes in play. So I hope you managed to get some downtime. We're going to start this first episode of the year, not surprisingly, with some predictions. We did a little bit of this in our last episode where we looked at our end of year report with Amy Stewart. But now we're going to be focusing on some predictions from our thought leaders here at Payscale. And I'm delighted to introduce James Atkinson, who is Vice President of Data Products. And I think this is James's first Comp and Coffee, so I'll let him introduce himself briefly in a minute. And I'm pleased to welcome back Lulu. Lulu, who has been here many times, our senior corporate attorney. And they are two of the thought leaders who featured in the downloadable guide, Top Predictions for HR, that we will make available to you in the episode summary. So welcome, James, to this first episode for you. Do you want to give the audience just a quick overview of how long you've been with Payscale and what your role is here?
Yes, well, thank you so much, Ruth. I'm delighted to be here. As you said, I'm relatively new to Payscale, started back in August, and I'm overseeing all of our data products here. And I've been in the compensation industry for about a decade now, having spent the last 9 or so years at Gartner overseeing all of our data products there. And so excited to be here and have a chat with you today.
Well, thanks for joining. And Lulu, do you want to remind our audience about what your role is here at Payscale?
Hi, everyone. Happy New Year. I'm Lulu Cycli, Senior Corporate Counsel here at Payscale. I'm Payscale's in-house employment counsel, but work very closely with Ruth and the thought leadership team to track all things legislation, pay transparency legislation, pay equity legislation globally. So very happy to be back.
Well, before we dive into predictions, let's just reflect on that festive period. Did you have a good break, both of you? And what was the thing you enjoyed the most about your time off? James, do you want to go first?
Sure. I really just enjoyed taking a step back and relaxing. We didn't do any traveling. We just kind of hung out as a family, had some great food, and just rested. So that's what I really enjoyed.
Yeah, I think like me, we traveled a lot in the back end of 23. And I think for just waking up and knowing I didn't have to go anywhere was probably one of the nicest things for me during this time off. What about you, Lulu?
Well, I took a little bit of PTO before the holidays. So this is your friendly reminder to plan your PTO for 2024. Make sure you take it. You deserve it. But my family and I, we went and did some of the Christmas markets in Germany and France before the holiday. And then luckily we were home for the holidays and traveled, didn't do anything. But one thing I always look forward to for the holidays is Christmas Eve. We have the same meal every year. It is a Swiss meal called raclette, where you melt raclette cheese. You eat it with potatoes and prosciuttos and dried meat and little cornichons. And it's a very heavy, wintry, cozy meal. And so it's a meal you eat once a year because it's very heavy. But I always look forward to that meal on Christmas Eve with my family.
That sounds fairly amazing. I'll have to arrange an invite for next year then, Lulu.
Yes, please.
Okay. So let's start thinking about predictions for 2024. We know that there's still a certain amount of uncertainty in the labour markets and the economy and increasing tension over the health of the job market. We covered some of that, as I mentioned, in our last episode. But two of the key drivers of change, I think, that will continue this year has been legislation and advancements in technology, which is why we have the perfect panelists here today with James and Lulu joining me today. So Lulu, as you mentioned earlier, really our eyes and ears here at Payscale on what's happening in the legislative landscape. What do you think is ahead in 2024 that will impact those of us managing compensation?
Well, what I'm about to say next will probably not surprise anybody who has been paying attention to the landscape, because pay transparency legislation has really, really caused a shakeup in compensation management. And I think it's truly the biggest we've seen in some time. In 2024, my predictions surrounding this area are that we could see more states proposing pay transparency legislation and maybe even being successful at passing it. So we could see states like Wisconsin, New Jersey, Maine, Massachusetts, and maybe even Washington, D.C. in the next few weeks Washington, D.C. in the next few weeks, pass some sort of pay transparency laws in 2024. So we saw in 2023 over a dozen states propose some sort of pay transparency law. And there were a lot of states where I was surprised about. So I think that more and more legislators are finally coming to understand that this is important. This is important for employees, for candidates. It really now seems like a time that no state wants to be left behind. And I think, too, with that pay transparency legislation in 2024, we are going to see more states tack on additional requirements for pay communications and communicating to incumbent employees what career progression looks like. Now, if you've been following kind of what we've been following over the last year, you'll remember that in the late spring, early summer of 2023, the European Union did pass their pay transparency directive. And each member state, each of the 27 member states, have until June of 2026 to start passing the laws to comply with that directive. So I do think in 2024, we are going to see some of these member states start passing these type of laws to get their houses in order. And so just as a quick reminder, it's very similar to the US legislation. This EU pay transparency directive is truly intended to help close the gender pay gap. And there are other sorts of other pay transparency enforcement mechanisms that this directive has taken into place as well. So I know that's a lot, but I think a lot's going to happen this year.
Well, 2024 is also a big year for democracy, a big year for elections globally, not least in the US. What impact do you think that might have on some of that legislative progress?
So in 2024, for those of y'all who aren't aware, there's a presidential election happening this year. We are underway right now for our presidential election year. So I don't think the 2024 presidential election will impact this type of legislation now in 2024. It will surely impact the number of states we do see propose pay transparency legislation. I think in 2025, when we have a new president sworn in, a new Congress sworn in, new state legislature sworn in. So those of y'all who've been following closely, we typically see states who are more blue, more Democratic leaning, be the ones who are the most successful at passing this type of legislation. So we're really going to have to see what these elections, what happens with these elections at the end of this year.
Great, thank you. And generally, what impact is that legislation having on compensation practice? What should our listeners be thinking about, do you think?
So, I mean, if these elections come out a certain way, we're going to see a lot more states expanding the legal requirements. So that's going to start pushing employers to start modernizing their compensation practices and standardizing pay communication. So from a legal perspective, I can explain to you what the law says all day long. But as an HR professional, as a comp professional, your best friend is your employment counsel, whether that person works for your company or if it's an employment attorney that works for a law firm that you contract with. That person should be your best friend because that person can be the best person to explain the legal requirements to you, specific to your organization, kind of what ducks you have to get in a row to be able to comply and just generally help you navigate these laws. But also consider your stance on legal obligation versus best practice. And I say this because there will be some states that don't require this type of pay transparency on a legal basis. But maybe as an organization, you've decided that you do want to be more transparent about your pay, regardless of what your state law says. So decide if this is something that you want to make as part of your compensation strategy just across the board.
Right. And I think one thing we have seen in terms of impact on compensation practice is that pay transparency legislation is having an impact on data and how we think about data, how we try and access data, and what data we can access, James. So you've been observing this year, in 23 and kind of going into 2024. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, thanks. Pay transparency, it's really having an impact on the demand for data in the comp industry. So if you think about how employees and job candidates, they have so much more access right now to reliable data. It's equipping them to better understand how to advocate for fair pay and to really engage in these. Compensation professionals really need to demand more reliable, certainly more timely data for them to stay competitive in the talent market, especially with the crazy kind of ebbs and flows of the talent market we've seen across these last few years. And, here at Payscale, we're certainly helping employers by ensuring we're providing that accurate and timely data to help them build out those pay structures and post salary ranges with confidence. And so that's one of the ways that we're trying to make sure that we are providing for our clients what they're demanding now based on how things are changing.
And another interesting side effect, I guess, of the pay transparency legislation is we see more organizations either in states where they're required to or doing it through best practice, posting pay ranges on job advertisements. And so that kind of makes the process of scraping data from job postings potentially a more viable data source. What's your view on that, James? 'Cause I know you've been taking a close look at that.
Yeah, absolutely. Job posting data, it's a really interesting source of data for understanding compensation. Now, it's not new in the HR space in that it's been used for several years, kind of in more recruiting and talent management, just to really understand how jobs are changing, what competitors are doing, certainly trying to understand how skills are evolving. And so there's a lot of ways in which it's being used. But we're really seeing a shift to where it's making its way into kind of the compensation world in the last couple of years. And that's driven by a couple of key things. One's exactly what you were just describing, which is that this pay transparency legislation means that simply there's just more data that's available across all of these job postings. And I saw a report a few months ago that, upwards of 40% of job postings on Indeed, for example, have some sort of salary data. So it really has changed dramatically across the last couple of years as a result of all of this pay legislation. But I think it's not just that there's more data available. I think it's also that there's just that greater demand for data, as we were just talking about those wildly changing wage markets in the last couple of years. People need to not just understand kind of where the market is, but also really understand or get a sense of where the market's going. Finally, job postings data also provides us an opportunity to understand some of those different compensable factors too that may impact those salary ranges. So, given that there's a wealth of that data in a typical job posting, I can see it being another source for compensation professionals to be using moving forward. And I think that, while it's certainly different than a typical comp survey, I do think we'll see this trend of using it more as a new comp data source, especially as a complement to other things to really
Mm.
help understand where the market's going.
Yeah, I think those challenges you've mentioned in the labor market, which have impacted, trying to find market competitive pay, has meant we're having to work harder as compensation professionals in terms of getting access to the information that is right for our organization. Because I think what I've observed is even within sectors, organizations have different talent requirements and have different, pay requirements. So I think we're having to work a lot harder. I can only see, looking down the line, more data becoming available. So I think it's going to be important for those of us using that data to make sure we understand, when is the best time to use that data and how to bring that data together and inform the decisions that you're making. But it's going to be an exciting thing to observe over the next couple of years, I think. Now, I think back to our predictions guide, the other kind of big topic of 23 was generative AI. That became undoubtedly, a hot topic last year. How do you see that shaping up now as we go into 2024? Will there be rapid adoption? Have people calmed down a bit now and they're going to be a bit more cautious? How do you see that playing out, particularly in the field of compensation?
Yeah, well, I think in generative AI, it really has that potential to just revolutionize how we think about talent acquisition kind of across the HR industry. Of course, as far as legislation will allow it, but in an era where we have lots of talent shortages, we need to skill, upskill, reskill. These things are becoming increasingly pressing. It's really an opportunity for us to leverage this new technology. And generative AI definitely made a big splash in 2023 and across the board made a big splash, but there was a little more caution in probably the HR industry initially. But I think that as we are moving into 2024, I think some of that caution is going to is going to change. I think we're going to see more AI experimentation and adoption that's really going to kind of expand and almost supercharge HR tech. We're certainly going to see new AI related jobs emerging across functions, across industries. The race to hire AI talent is also going to continue it to emerge. And I think if we think about what the best organizations are going to be doing, they're going to be looking to leverage AI and generative AI specifically to accelerate and really improve their compensation functions. So I think there's a lot of exciting things on the horizon for us as we think about how that can change what we're doing in the space.
Yeah, but I think as momentum gathered during 2023, I think the one question that started coming up was, ethics and how do we control this? And James has outlined, Lulu, the need to proceed with caution. Are you seeing any legislation that may put guardrails on how AI is used in HR?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the province of Ontario up in Canada, we recently saw proposed legislation. It's a pay transparency law that they've proposed, very similar to what we've seen in the US side in terms of requiring certain employers to post salary ranges and job postings. But what was interesting about this piece of legislation in particular is that Ontario was the first, I guess, legislative body to add a provision stating that if that law passes, and if an organization uses AI during any point of the hiring process, think of, ADT, resume reviews, things like that, then those employers must disclose that they're using AI. Just a few weeks ago on the US side, not surprisingly, but California is taking the charge to tackle workplace AI as well. So the California Privacy Protection Agency proposed a regulation which would require employers using AI during the hiring process to disclose that any decision made was based on the use of technology. And it took it a step further that the affected individuals have the right to know how the technology was used. So this is going to be an interesting, I think, change here on the US side. In addition to pay transparency legislation, I think a lot of states are also going to tack on this AI piece of it. In California, the proposed regulation also can allow employees and candidates to opt out of using certain technology, including AI tools used in the hiring process. So just this morning, we just came to find out that California seems to be moving quickly in terms of this kind of regulation. So we are actually anticipating this regulation could be ready for a final vote in Q2 or Q3 of 2024. So they're moving quite quickly here.
So that regulation's mainly focused on candidates or employees understanding what AI is being used during the talent acquisition process. Yeah. I mean, I think it's worth not forgetting there's obviously a whole raft of other legislation out there that you should continue to think about as you're deploying AI. So, if you start to deploy AI in making compensation decisions, for example, you can't just kind of assume it's going to be right. And you will still need to ensure that equal pay, for example, or pay equity is being adhered to. And just because AI made the decision means it's right. There's still a lot of biases, I think, in data, James, that is feeding those AI algorithms and the machine learning that has a lot of biases built into it.
And I think too, when AI started becoming a really big thing, and I think I said this on a previous webinar or podcast, I know a lot of comp professionals were getting nervous. Like, is AI going to take my job? And the answer is no, because AI still has biases. AI can still discriminate against groups of people that have historically been discriminated against. And you'll always need that human check. So just to double down on what Ruth just said, you always need that human check.
Yeah. And I think we've talked about this before, James. Market data as it exists today has certain biases built in it because it reflects the pay market, which we know not everybody is paid equally in the pay market. And the more organizations that address, making sure that they're paying equitably within their organizations, then the market data will kind of become more equitable. But there's also that risk with using that data in NI that we're not guaranteeing that just because AI made the decision, it's all things are equal.
Yeah, absolutely. The data is there. AI is a layer that's put across that. But if the fundamental underlying data has those biases already in it, that's neither going to get improved or get worse with kind of that AI layer on top of it. So it's important to remember that those biases are are baked into the system overall.
So, what are we thinking about AI? How are we using it here at Payscale, James? And what's the plan going forward?
Yeah, so AI is not new to Payscale. We actually use a variety of different technologies based on AI across our products, things like machine learning, natural language processing, data science. For example, we have natural language processing models that recommend matches for jobs within a user's organization to those within our compensation data sets. We have a compensation model based on employee reported data. That's a machine learning model. It helps predict pay ranges based on different compensable factors. So things like experience, education, industry, and so on. So we're already leveraging that kind of in our products today, but we're staying very focused on how we can continue to use this technology in a way that will be helpful for all of our clients. And so we actually have some new AI-based technology powering these new solutions on the kind of near horizon as well. So, for example, this quarter, we're launching a new AI-powered tool that will automatically match clients' jobs to our peer data set based on some predefined criteria that our clients can set. So, it allows our clients to kind of quickly and confidently match multiple jobs automatically without having to kind of work through that process themselves. Now, of course, clients can accept, they can change, they have all the power to put their layer of expertise on top of that. But this new functionality gives them that head start. It allows them to have kind of a starting point with a lot of confidence. We also are releasing an AI powered job summary generator. So if you think about kind of writing those job descriptions, that can be a pretty challenging part of job description management. And so we've integrated with OpenAI to allow users to generate those job summaries and really just make one step in the process easier. Now, again, power is with the client, so they can keep what's been suggested, they can change it, they can generate a new one. But we're really excited to help our clients get started on that process within our product so they can really manage their workflows more efficiently. And we're certainly continuing to research new applications of this technology to really help our clients more efficiently, effectively solve their biggest problems. So, including things like how to better search for and match to their jobs, how to provide more accurate data across those jobs, and really just how to increase the performance of the overall experience with our products as well.
Well, that's all sounds exciting. I think,
Yeah.
as a practitioner myself, the whole market benchmarking, writing job descriptions process was quite time consuming with many, many kind of small tasks. So it's great to hear that, technology is going to make those workflows better, as you said. So those have been the key predictions from Lulu and James. As I mentioned at the top of this program, they are all in our HR predictions guide that you can download, and we'll include the link to that in the episode summary. A couple of more general questions for you before we close out. I asked this of some of our senior leaders on a webinar at the end of December. What was the one thing that surprised you most as you looked back on 2023? Lulu, do you want to take that one first?
I was mostly surprised at how many states proposed pay transparency bills in 23. There were some states I was not surprised about, but some states like West Virginia and Montana, I was very surprised about. And spoiler alert, those bills did not go anywhere, but it was still nice to see so many states propose pay transparency legislation. And it really just means that these legislators are really starting to understand the importance of how this legislation can help close the gender pay gaps.
Yeah, I think my big surprise was the EU Pay Transparency Directive, because that was such a mammoth piece of legislation that actually getting passed and the potential impact that that might have. So we were definitely on the legislation side, you and I, Lulu. James, what about you? What was your big surprise in 2023?
You know, for me, I was just surprised at how quickly generative AI just dominated the conversation and really in all walks of life. And the adoption cycle of this technology moved so quickly across consumer and commercial areas. And, a lot of companies were just so tense and scrambling to just figure out how to use it, how to regulate it, how to really take advantage of this new technology that everybody is talking about. And certainly in the compensation industry, we've seen slower adoption than in some other areas. But as we talked before, I expect some of that caution to move to greater excitement and ultimately greater adoption as we're heading into 2024.
Yeah, it's going to just interesting to see if that pace continues, in terms of rapid development of how we use that technology. And then maybe you could just give our audience a minute or two to impart your biggest piece of advice for 2024. James, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, so for me, and it goes with what I was just saying, is really just kind of buckle up and pay attention to what's happening. I think AI will continue to be such a game changer, really in all parts of our lives, and in the compensation industry specifically, I think it's going to take off. I think we're going to see kind of how it's going to change the ways we collect and process data, how we're managing that data through our compensation tools, how we're using data to make and communicate really more reliable and impactful compensation decisions. So it will be very important for our comp professionals to stay current on the latest advances and ensure that they are leveraging that AI powered technology to really be more effective and efficient in their roles.
And what about you, Lulu? What's your big piece of advice for 2024?
Prepare, prepare, prepare. Do not get left behind on this train. Even if you live in a state that will likely never see pay transparency legislation, it's coming to a state near you, or it's coming because the federal government is going to require it. And even if the legislation isn't coming to a state near you, or even if the federal government isn't going to take a stance on this, candidates are expecting you to be transparent about pay. So I've used this analogy before, but there was a time when I was a young lady where, we would answer the phone not knowing who the heck was on the other line. And now caller ID is a thing. And now I never answer my phone if that phone number is not saved in my phone. This caller ID analogy is so perfect when it comes to pay transparency. Now that a lot of organizations have opened the doors and let candidates in to see how much they're willing to pay a candidate, candidates now know that that's the expectation. They don't want to go applying to a job blind anymore. So if you're not going to get on board, you're going to get left behind, and you're going to feel that in the quality of your candidates, and you're going to see that in your attrition numbers as well.
Well, thank you. Great advice, both of you. Know that at Payscale here, we'll be aiming to keep you up to date with what you need to be thinking about as you progress through 2024. So come back to Comp and Coffee and we'll keep you up to date with the hot topics as we go through 2024. Do you think we've missed anything? Are there any topics that you would like us to discuss? If you email us at coffee@payscale.com, we'll pick up those suggestions and make sure we incorporate them into a future episode. So thanks very much, James. Thanks, Lulu, for joining me today. Really engrossing conversation. And I look forward to having you both back soon on Comp and Coffee. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.